Everything that I've done has been from my background. It's been music that was literally in the living room when I was growing up.
I was struggling with pitch. I didn't have any color that I could bring into my voice. I got to the point where I was basically really shouting and barking.
She sold over 100 million records, shattered barriers as the queen of rock, and lived a life surrounded by fame, fortune, and controversy. But behind the spotlight, Linda Ronstadt carried secrets that few ever knew. From lonely nights on the road, to turbulent romances with Hollywood giants, to the devastating illness that silenced her voice forever. At 79, she finally admits what many had long suspected. Linda Ronstadt's story begins far from the bright lights of stadiums and magazine covers. In the desert landscape of Tucson, Arizona, born in 1946 into a musically gifted family, her background was as diverse as her future career would become. Her father, Gilbert, a machinery merchant with a passion for traditional Mexican music, filled the home with songs that celebrated his heritage. Her mother, Ruth, came from a very different world, one steeped in classical opera and the works of great composers. Together, their influences blended inside the young Linda, creating a foundation that was equal parts earthy and sophisticated. Tucson's quiet desert nights and the mix of cultures surrounding her shaped the deep, soulful tone that later defined her voice. Unlike many artists who stumbled into music, Linda grew up surrounded by it as if it were part of her DNA. As a teenager, she began singing locally with her siblings, testing her voice against folk songs and traditional tunes, but it wasn't long before she outgrew the small stages of Tucson. In the mid-1960s, Linda joined forces with guitarist Bobby Kimmel and songwriter Kenny Edwards to form the Stone Ponies. What began as a modest folk rock trio would unexpectedly catapult her into the national spotlight. Their 1967 hit, Different Drum, written by Michael Nesmith of the Monkees, showcased Linda's powerful voice in a way that demanded attention. The single became a breakout success, selling over 1 million copies and marking the moment Linda Ronstadt was no longer just a promising voice from Arizona. She was on the path to stardom. But success came with difficult choices. By the late 60s, it was clear that Linda's raw talent couldn't be contained within a group. The Stone Ponies faded into history, while Linda faced the terrifying leap into a solo career. In 1969, she released Hand Sewn Homegrown, often considered the first alternative country record by a female artist. While the album didn't become a blockbuster, it was groundbreaking. It proved that a woman could take risks in genres dominated by men and still hold her ground. From there, she explored country, rock, and pop with an adventurous spirit that would become her trademark. Songs like Long, Long Time earned her early Grammy recognition, while her cover of Silver Threads and Golden Needles signaled her crossover into country charts. Though the music world was full of skepticism about whether a young woman could truly dominate rock stages, Linda's powerful performances told a different story. She wasn't content to play second fiddle in a man's industry. She was determined to lead it. What no one realized then was that this fearless move into uncharted territory would set the stage for one of the most extraordinary careers in American music. Yet even as her star rose, Linda was about to discover that breaking through glass ceilings came with battles that went far beyond the music itself.
So, I kind of listen to the guitar or something like that. So I can't really say, if somebody plays a great guitar like that,
By the mid-1970s, Linda Ronstadt was no longer just a rising star. She was rewriting the rules of rock. With the release of Heart Like a Wheel in 1974, her career exploded. The album didn't just climb the charts. It cemented her place as one of the most important voices of the decade. Songs like You're No Good and When Will I Be Loved didn't just become hits. They became anthems that proved a woman could headline arenas, dominate radio, and outsell male artists who had long ruled the industry. Suddenly, Linda was appearing on the covers of Rolling Stone, Newsweek, and Time, hailed as the First Lady of Rock. Audiences were captivated by her voice, her presence, and the fearless way she moved between country, rock, and pop, as if genres were nothing more than stepping stones. But while the public saw a glamorous superstar conquering every stage, Linda's climb came with heavy challenges. The rock world of the 1970s was still built around men, and women who dared to take center stage were often dismissed or patronized. Industry insiders often referred to her dismissively as a girl singer, ignoring the fact that she was selling out arenas larger than most male acts could ever dream of. Promoters and journalists questioned her ability to command the rock stage, while critics scrutinized everything from her wardrobe to her personal life. Linda admitted that touring at the time felt isolating, a blur of buses, hotel rooms, and unfamiliar faces. Behind the cheers of sold-out crowds, she described a kind of loneliness so deep that it left her questioning the very lifestyle she had chosen. Her 1977 album, Simple Dreams, took her success even further, producing multiple hit singles like Blue Bayou and It's So Easy. At this point, she wasn't just a star. She was the highest-paid female rock performer in the world. Stadiums that had once only welcomed male legends now sold out for Linda Ronstadt. But the more she achieved, the harder she had to fight to be taken seriously. Other musicians often treated her as competition rather than a peer, and some male bandmates resented the idea of being seen as backing players for a woman. Even in interviews, Linda found herself pushed into awkward corners, asked about romance, fashion, or femininity, rather than artistry and production choices. Still, she refused to be boxed in. Each album was a statement that she couldn't be tied to one sound. She followed up with Living in the USA in 1978, another blockbuster that made history as the first US album by any artist to ship over 2 million copies. Critics struggled to define her. Was she country, rock, or pop? The answer was all three. To Linda, music was about expression, not labels, and she was proving that versatility was its own kind of power. Yet even as she dominated charts and stages, Linda admitted to moments of self-doubt. She confessed in interviews that she often wondered whether she was good enough, despite the millions of fans who adored her. That mix of strength and vulnerability made her not just a performer, but a human face audiences could connect with. She was living the dream of every aspiring singer, but she was also paying the price for being a pioneer in a world that wasn't ready for women to stand at the top. While Linda Ronstadt was breaking barriers as a solo artist, she was also quietly shaping the future of American rock through the musicians she surrounded herself with. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, she needed a band to back her live performances, and that decision changed music history. Among the musicians she hired were Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Bernie Leadon, and Randy Meisner. At the time, they were just hungry, ambitious players looking for a shot. On stage behind Linda, they learned the rhythms of touring, the discipline of the recording studio, and what it meant to connect with massive audiences. Very soon after, they left to form the Eagles, a band that would become one of the most successful acts in the world. Without Linda, their paths might have been very different, and many of them later acknowledged that their time backing her gave them both experience and exposure that launched their careers. But the Eagles weren't her only connection to music royalty. She performed alongside Jackson Browne, worked closely with songwriter J.D. Souther, and built a lifelong friendship with Emmylou Harris. She also opened for Neil Young, holding her own in front of the same rock crowds who worshipped him. These collaborations weren't just casual, they were stepping stones that proved Linda belonged in the same league as the men who dominated the rock circuit. What set her apart was that she didn't see herself as a competitor. She saw herself as an equal, even when the industry didn't. Still, the road wasn't easy. Ronstadt often spoke about the difficulties of being a woman fronting an all-male band. Male musicians had egos, and some resented the idea of being labeled sidemen for a female singer, no matter how talented she was. Linda described how hard it was to even find musicians who were comfortable in that role. It wasn't unusual for bandmates to view her success as a threat, and this constant undercurrent of insecurity and competition often spilled into her personal relationships. While some female singers of the era leaned into a softer image, Linda resisted. She wanted respect for her artistry, not her femininity, and that often put her at odds with the expectations of both the press and the people around her. Her partnership with producer Peter Asher became a turning point. Recommended to her by James Taylor's sister, Asher was someone who could match her vision without undermining her authority. He gave Linda the space to co-produce, to make bold artistic choices, and to craft the kind of albums she wanted. Unlike others she'd worked with, Asher respected her leadership. This collaboration led to some of her most successful albums throughout the 1970s and 1980s, a period when her career reached heights no other female rock artist had touched. Looking back, her role in launching the Eagles is often highlighted as a piece of rock history. But at the time, it was just another example of Linda Ronstadt being ahead of the curve. She had an instinct for spotting talent, for surrounding herself with musicians who shared her hunger, and for taking risks on stage that others might have avoided. What seemed like a supporting detail in her career turned out to be a monumental influence on one of the biggest rock bands of all time. For millions of fans, Linda Ronstadt looked untouchable. She had the voice, the chart-topping albums, the magazine covers, and the respect of the entire music industry. But behind the applause, Linda wrestled with something few ever suspected: an unshakable sense of self-doubt. In interviews, she admitted that during concerts, if she saw people whispering in the audience, her mind would immediately assume the worst, that they were criticizing her, calling her the worst singer they'd ever heard. It didn't matter that her voice was selling millions of records, or that critics praised her range. To Linda, the fear of not being good enough was always there, lurking just out of sight. The endless grind of touring only made things harder. Life on the road, which fans often imagined as glamorous, felt more like survival. Days blurred into nights of buses, hotel rooms, sound checks, dinners, and performances, repeated in a cycle that stripped away normal life. Linda compared it to the seafaring tales of Joseph Conrad: lonely, repetitive, and emotionally draining. The world outside seemed to race past her, while she remained trapped in a bubble of constant travel. For all her success, Linda confessed to a kind of emptiness that came with fame. The roar of thousands of fans might fill an arena, but once the show ended, she was alone. She also struggled with her place in a male-dominated industry. Critics and fellow musicians often questioned her authority, and even though she had proven herself as one of the most powerful performers of the decade, she constantly felt she had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. She noticed that female artists weren't treated as equals but as novelties. Press coverage often focused on her looks, her clothes, or her dating life rather than her craft. She once remarked how hard it was to find bandmates who didn't resent being seen as backup players for a female star, a problem that gnawed at her throughout her career. Even when she found respect, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that she was faking it. She said it took her years to learn how to shut out distractions and lose herself completely in the music, to reach the point where singing felt natural instead of a performance under scrutiny. Those who worked with her noticed the contradiction. On stage, she was commanding, fearless, and larger than life. Off stage, she could be quiet, reserved, and insecure about whether she deserved the very acclaim she was receiving. This mix of strength and vulnerability became part of her mystique. Fans connected not just with her voice, but with the sense that she was human underneath the star image. Unlike some rock icons who built personas of invincibility, Linda never pretended she had it all figured out. She admitted to being lonely, she admitted to being afraid, and she admitted that despite the awards and headlines, she often felt like she wasn't good enough. Ironically, it was that honesty that made people love her more. But as her career soared higher, those insecurities often spilled into her personal life. Relationships proved difficult, not because she lacked opportunities, but because fame came with expectations and pressures most people couldn't understand. For all her success, Linda Ronstadt's personal life became a subject of endless fascination. She was beautiful, famous, and surrounded by some of the most influential men in music, politics, and Hollywood. Yet despite a string of high-profile romances, she never walked down the aisle. To fans and tabloids, this choice seemed mysterious, fueling rumors and speculation about her orientation, her independence, and whether she was afraid of commitment. But Linda herself always gave a simpler explanation. Music came first, and she wasn't willing to compromise who she was for the sake of tradition. Her relationships read like a list of cultural giants. In the 1970s, she was romantically linked to songwriter and producer John Boylan, who also guided her career. Their bond was creative as well as personal, but the intensity of her ambition eventually outgrew the relationship. After Boylan, she found herself drawn to J.D. Souther, a talented songwriter with whom she shared both a home and a deep musical connection. Together, they created some of her most memorable songs, including Faithless Love and Simple Man, Simple Dreams. Yet, like many of Linda's romances, it burned bright and ended abruptly. J.D. later admitted he couldn't even recall the exact reason they broke up. It was simply over, another casualty of the demanding world they lived in. Her romances weren't limited to the music world. In the late 70s, Linda began a relationship with California Governor Jerry Brown. Their partnership fascinated the media. America's rock queen with a future presidential candidate. Together they split their time between Los Angeles and Malibu, but their relationship, though affectionate, was strained by Brown's political ambitions. When he ran for president in 1980, Linda publicly supported him, even organizing concerts in his honor. But when his campaign collapsed, so did much of their bond. Decades later, she would describe Brown as disciplined, intelligent, and unlike the typical men of rock and roll, but ultimately not the partner who could make her settle down. In the 1980s, she surprised everyone by briefly dating comedian Bill Murray and later Jim Carrey, who was still years away from becoming a Hollywood star. Yet perhaps her most famous romance was with filmmaker George Lucas, the visionary behind Star Wars. For years, they kept their relationship private, and at one point, they were even engaged. But in 1988, they quietly ended things, leaving many to wonder why two of the most powerful figures in entertainment couldn't make it work. Linda would later hint that her career ambitions and independence often clashed with the traditional roles expected in relationships, and she refused to bend simply to fit someone else's mold. As the years went on, Linda decided to make her own version of family. In 1990, she adopted her daughter Mary Clementine, followed by her son Carlos in 1994. Moving away from the constant noise of Los Angeles, she returned to Tucson to raise them in a quieter, more grounded environment. To her, motherhood was more meaningful than marriage ever could have been. She once joked that she was a serial monogamist and didn't see the point of forcing marriage when her heart wasn't in it. For most of her career, Linda Ronstadt had been admired for her voice, not her politics. But in the 2000s, she shocked fans and critics alike by speaking out more forcefully than ever before. What many didn't expect was that the same woman who sang tender ballads and country rock anthems was unafraid to use her stage as a platform for her beliefs, even when it came with serious consequences. The most infamous moment came in 2004, during a performance at the Aladdin Theater in Las Vegas. At the height of the Iraq War, she dedicated the song Desperado to filmmaker Michael Moore and praised his documentary Fahrenheit 9/11, a film that criticized President George W. Bush. The reaction from the audience was explosive. Some applauded, others booed, and the controversy didn't end when the show was over. Ronstadt was reportedly escorted out of the hotel afterward, sparking a firestorm of national debate. Suddenly her name was making headlines, not for her music, but for whether entertainers should express political opinions on stage. The New York Times, CNN, and nearly every major outlet covered the fallout. For Linda, the backlash was intense, but so was the support. Friends like Elton John, the Rolling Stones, and even her old collaborators in the Eagles rallied behind her. This wasn't a one-time outburst. Ronstadt continued to call out the Bush administration, describing the Iraq War as immoral and criticizing the government's dishonesty in selling it to the public. In interviews, she didn't mince words, at one point flat-out calling Bush an idiot. While some fans abandoned her for being outspoken, others admired her courage to say what many were afraid to admit. She later reflected that she could have been more gracious in her delivery, but insisted that she wouldn't take back the core of what she said, that war and deception had no place in democracy. Her activism went far beyond the Iraq War. In her home state of Arizona, she became an outspoken critic of anti-immigration laws, including Sheriff Joe Arpaio's aggressive policing tactics. She even joined a lawsuit challenging the controversial SB 1070 law, which many saw as targeting Latino communities. Drawing on her Mexican heritage, Linda argued passionately that immigrants deserve dignity, not persecution. Her stance on immigration wasn't a trendy position at the time. It was risky, controversial, and deeply personal. She was also a strong advocate for gay rights and same-sex marriage, long before it became a mainstream issue. In interviews, she called homophobia anti-family and said equality was not negotiable. For Linda, these positions weren't just political. They were rooted in her sense of justice and compassion. She believed artists had a responsibility to speak up even when it wasn't convenient or popular. Her outspokenness extended to environmental issues as well. She supported sustainable agriculture, praising activist Wes Jackson's work as the most important in the country. She even used her concerts as platforms to raise awareness, dedicating performances to causes she believed in. By this point in her career, Linda didn't need to worry about album sales or public image. She had already secured her place as one of the greatest voices in American music. That freedom allowed her to speak her mind without fear of losing her livelihood. But it also cemented her reputation as more than just a singer. She was a cultural figure, unafraid to challenge authority. For an artist whose entire identity was built around her voice, the cruelest twist of fate came in the 2010s. In August 2013, Linda Ronstadt stunned fans when she revealed she could no longer sing. The reason, at first, was thought to be Parkinson's disease, a diagnosis she had received 8 months earlier after years of unexplained symptoms. She admitted she hadn't been able to sing for several years, but until then, she had kept the truth hidden. For a performer who once commanded stadiums with effortless power, the realization that her voice was gone was devastating, not just for her but for the millions who had grown up with her music. At first, Linda herself didn't fully understand what was happening. She thought the weakness in her voice came from shoulder surgery or even a tick bite. But as her ability to control her vocal muscles deteriorated, the reality became undeniable. Singing, the thing that had always come as naturally as breathing, was suddenly impossible. No matter how hard I tried, she later explained, nothing came out. It was a loss that went beyond career. It was a loss of self. Then came another shock. By late 2019, doctors revised her diagnosis. It wasn't Parkinson's after all, but a related condition called progressive supranuclear palsy, a rare degenerative disease that shares many symptoms with Parkinson's but progresses differently. For Linda, the distinction mattered less than the outcome. Either way, her singing voice, the tool that made her a superstar, was permanently gone. Fans grieved with her, but Linda herself spoke about it with remarkable clarity. She said that while it was painful to lose her voice, she was grateful for the decades she had been able to sing. Instead of dwelling on what was lost, she chose to focus on what she could still do. Spend time with her children, stay engaged with political and cultural issues, and look back proudly at her career. Still, her friends and collaborators admitted it was heartbreaking. Emmylou Harris once said that Linda's voice was unlike anyone else's, and the idea that such a gift had been silenced felt almost unfair. Yet even without her voice, Linda's impact continued to be recognized. In 2014, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, though she was too ill to attend the ceremony in person. Artists like Bonnie Raitt, Stevie Nicks, and Sheryl Crow celebrated her influence, calling her a trailblazer who had made it possible for women to command stages and studios on their own terms. 2 years later, in 2016, she received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, a fitting honor for someone whose career had spanned genres, broken records, and inspired generations. For Linda, the loss of her voice marked the end of an era, but not the end of her story. She once compared singing to flying. It was freedom, joy, and transcendence all at once. To have that taken away was a cruel blow, but it also forced her to reflect on everything she had achieved. And in many ways, the silence only amplified her legacy. People weren't just listening to her songs. They were remembering what it felt like when her voice could cut through a room, lift an audience, and leave them breathless. Even in silence, Linda Ronstadt's voice echoes through generations. With more than 100 million albums sold worldwide, she remains one of the best-selling female artists in history. In the 1970s alone, she became the first woman to consistently sell out arenas, the first to score 8 consecutive platinum albums, and the first to prove that female artists could dominate not only country or pop, but also rock, an arena long considered off-limits. Her 1976 Greatest Hits album has sold over 7 million copies in the United States, while her Spanish-language record Canciones de mi Padre became the best-selling non-English language album in American history. Few artists could claim that kind of versatility, and fewer still could do it while constantly pushing boundaries. But her numbers tell only part of the story. Linda's true legacy is in the way she paved the road for those who followed. Without her, there might never have been a Stevie Nicks, a Sheryl Crow, or any of the women who later demanded their rightful place in rock. She showed that a woman could headline massive tours, control her own career, and refuse to be reduced to the label of girl singer. Her collaborations with Emmylou Harris and Dolly Parton proved that women could stand together and create magic in an industry built to pit them against each other. Her courage extended beyond music. By using her fame to speak out on immigration, same-sex marriage, environmental issues, and politics, Linda took risks that many artists avoided. She believed her platform came with responsibility, even when it cost her popularity in certain circles. Decades later, her honesty is part of what fans admire most about her. She didn't hide behind an image, she spoke her truth. Recognition eventually caught up with her. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 2014, the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016, and tributes from peers across every genre reminded the world of what she had given. Even as disease silenced her singing voice, her influence continued to grow, because Linda Ronstadt was never just about the music. She was about independence, authenticity, and resilience. Looking back, her story isn't just about the triumphs, the romances, or the controversies. It's about a woman who defied expectations at every turn. She never fit neatly into a box. Too country for rock, too rock for country, too outspoken for Hollywood glamour. And yet, that refusal to be defined was exactly what made her unforgettable. Today, as fans revisit her albums, documentaries, and interviews, Linda Ronstadt stands as more than a legend of the past. She is a reminder that greatness comes from daring to be yourself, even when the world demands otherwise. Her voice may be gone, but her music lives on in every record, every performance, and every artist she inspired. Linda Ronstadt didn't just sing songs. She left behind a soundtrack of courage, heartbreak, rebellion, and truth. And in the end, that is a legacy no illness can ever silence.